Bogota. Our very special guest has not been on the show since June 13th, 2017. It was episode 189, and we were talking about the iQuiz, Colombia, I think. It was a pub quiz that he hosts or hosted. I don't know if it's still going, but we can ask him that now. It's Wrong Way Corrigan. That's right. It's Brendan Corrigan. I guess Bogota's favorite Irishman here. He's a broadcast journalist. He's, well, like all of us who are freelance, we have about 7 jobs each. He's on the line from another part of Bogota, and it's just nice to catch up with another immigrant to Colombia. He's been here since 2011. Welcome back. Welcome back, Brendan.
Yeah, great to be back. Saying
2017, Brendan. It's a long time ago. I can't think of how we
June 2000 or not.
Yeah. How do we catch up all of those years? How do we catch up everything that's happened in between 2017 and 2025? I mean, I follow your movements through your blog and through your social media posts and so on. And I did see that at some point you had a regular job. You were in an office. How was that?
It was an experience. I hope you can hear me okay, because we are both in Bogota, but it seems like I might as well be in North Korea doing this.
Yeah, your internet's a bit wobbly, but it's fine.
But anyway, okay. Well, we'll soldier on. As long as it's good for you and everybody can hear me, then that's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was late 2018, kind of for visa purposes, and that's another saga, but thankfully one that's been put to bed in the last 12 months or so. But I started a full-time job with a marketing agency as a copywriter, glorified translator, really. And it was an experience. I kind of always said that I came to Colombia for the adventure and for travel and kind of to be as independent as I could be. But then I took on that job at DDB Colombia, to give them their name, because circumstances dictated. And I thought, let's give it a go, see what it's like. It was interesting. I was pretty much happy to leave it, to be honest. Look, I don't want to sound like that, like my work ethic is terrible or whatever, but when you're kind of working for the system, doing really long hours, kind of typical 14-hour days or whatever, for marketing, for company, obviously a marketing agency. So you were outsourcing the work, really. So Avianca was a client, Cerveza Poker, actually, which is closer to my heart in a sense. I did some work for Cerveza Poker beer. Other clients, Juan Valdez for a time. I just felt you feel quite removed from the actual final product and the company that you're doing the work for, because there are account executives, etc. Like, I'll just give one tiny example. Avianca will be launching a campaign in New York or whatever in North America, and they'd come up with everything in Spanish, and they'd have absolutely no English input at that stage. And then it would kind of come to me, and they kind of go, "Oh, well, kind of switch this around or whatever." And I'd be kind of, well, it's not going to be in English. Why don't you do it from the get-go? Or it's not going to be in Spanish. Why don't you do it from the get-go in English? But they don't. And it kind of just felt a bit of a convoluted process, and it could certainly do with far more efficiency. That was my experience of it. It was interesting. It was nice to work in an office. I made some new friends there, obviously, all pretty young, in their early 20s, just fresh out of university, a lot of them. And I had it fairly easy. I was the only native English speaker in the company, I think, of about 100 or so employees, even more. And so I kind of got a little bit of leeway in terms of, I did try to stick to my contracted hours. When it came to 6 p.m., I'd be going, okay, I'm getting out the door. Now, there were a few occasions when I did have to almost overnight it, but there were the guys who did the digital work, because obviously I was just text, really, writing text, translating, etc. The guys who were doing videos, like Avianca would come and say, "Oh, we need a video tomorrow." And you just can't turn around these things like that. But of course, the account executives would go, okay, of course, and then that would all be shoveled on to the worker ants. And I regularly come in there at 7:30 in the morning, and there'd be guys that were sleeping on their desks, doing overnighters, and all for relatively little. Like those guys were on, if they were on 2 million pesos a month, they were doing well. So it didn't seem to be much of a life to it. No. But that's the marketing agency work. And that, like I said, look, I could do that kind of work in theory anyway in Europe or North America, whatever, and earn dollars, earn euros, and hopefully save a bit, and then come to Colombia. I didn't come to Colombia to earn a pretty paltry wage, working 14, 15 hours a day. And obviously, I know I'm speaking from a point of privilege here because I am from a high income nation originally, so I can afford to do that in some ways. I guess the longer I'm here in Colombia, the more I'm losing that connection with the high income nation. But I still have that privilege in some ways. These guys who just, they don't have any savings at all, so they've just got to work at whatever they can find. And when their bosses tell them, jump, they ask how high. And that is the rat race that I've been trying to avoid, and avoiding it relatively successful for the last few years, I have to say, Rich.
So how long did you last at this business?
14 months. I left, and of course we all know what came along about a month later. There was already musings coming out from the Far East of a certain virus that might cause eruptions. And I left then because I remember talking to my mother a little bit later, and she was like, well, imagine if you'd stayed and you'd probably, working from home. Now, again, all that kind of stuff, working from home, I'm not a big working from home fan either. Even when it comes to teaching English, like I prefer to be in a classroom environment in front of the people. Giving a class virtually it's never been something I liked. So who knows? I kind of made the joke that people talked about the Great Resignation that came during the pandemic. Well, I started that before the pandemic. I got out. I could see it was a rat race job going nowhere. And to be honest, Richard, though, you mentioned, like, I had my own podcast, which I dabbled in for a while as well, but I kind of prefer to stick to my blogging or whatever. I have to say, fair play to you for 551 episodes, wherever you get the strength to do that. Good on you. But I had been doing a podcast with La Revista Semana. And there was talk, you see, about potentially trying to monetize our podcast, because I was getting absolutely nothing for it. It was just publicity. And while I had the full-time job, I was kind of happy to keep my hand in doing the podcast with La Revista Semana, and obviously using their brand, well-known current affairs magazine here in Colombia, of course. So that kind of gave me some sort of impetus. I said, you know what, I'm going to focus on this, get out of this rat race job that I know I don't want to do. I've had enough of it. It was an experience, but I've done 14 months. It's enough. And then when the pandemic came, Semana was like, okay, studio access only to essential content. Only for essential content. So I lost the connection. And then I was thought, well, like, if I continue doing the podcast from home for Semana, if I get whatever X amount of views, that's just all for Semana, nothing for me. So then I did actually just start my own little podcast after that, because also that was around the time, which I'm guessing Colombia Calling listeners will perhaps know, or maybe not, Vicky Davila, well-known journalist here, and she came into Semana, and she obviously had her vision for it as well, whereas I had been in there under different management. So I started my own, the Corrigan cast thing. And again, that was a bit of fun. And during the pandemic days, it was interesting. Like, I had some interesting guests like Neil Ferguson. I'm a big fan of his, actually. Certainly was, anyway. Jay Bhattacharya, who's now going to be the director of the National Institutes of Health in the United States. He was very much against lockdowns, etc. People might guess on the direction of where I went in terms of the pandemic, but I don't want to start that debate again. But yeah, so I had a few interesting guests and things like that. But again, like most of these things, Richard, for me, I guess bottom line is, like, I know you're a hotelier and all that, so the podcast kind of can complement everything else that you're doing. But I was kind of doing it as a hoping that it could be something that would generate revenue. So then after a while, you're kind of going, well, at least with the blog, it doesn't take up. I don't have to, as you know, organize interviews and set them up and whatever, and hope connections are great, etc. Whereas when I do my blog, it's just a little less taxing. So that was the reason. I need to kind of focus more on where I'm going to get an income rather than doing these kind of hobbies that are fun. I do enjoy them, but one has to think about the income.
We all need to think about income. I mean, so you were ahead of the curve in the great resignation. Did you have any run-in with Vicky Davila, who obviously who's now running, a potential presidential candidate for 2026? Did you have any run-in? Did she say, no more of that Irish guy? Did she throw you out?
Oh, no. I had a few messages with her hoping that we could continue. But then, as I said, obviously with the pandemic, everything kind of everything was on hold anyway. Yeah. And then as things started opening up again, like I do still have her number, whether she manages her WhatsApp or whatever these days, I'm not sure. But there wasn't really much interest because I was hoping to make it into something a little bit grander than just a podcast. Like I was saying, how about, trying to follow maybe a BBC model where you've got BBC in Espanol, you've got BBC all over the world, they've got their versions all over. So how about having, at least for Colombia, like a semana in English, where they do, so, I kind of had these ideas that I was throwing out there. And she kind of, all I can say is she would feign interest because she would say, okay, it's interesting, but nothing would ever come of it. So I kind of, after a while, I got the hint and left it at that. Because obviously the more logical path, Richard, for me would have been to do something more with El Tiempo, because I've had a blog on El Tiempo, which basically I just syndicate the stories on my Google blog out to El Tiempo these days. But I've been doing that since 2014. So now, goodness, 11 years. But there's never been any interest from El Tiempo because obviously I got a few contacts back in the day and kind of asking, are you interested in? But it's one of those things sometimes. Well, I don't know. I look at, journalism in general, when you go in the freelance way, it can be difficult to make ends meet. And then here in Colombia, obviously English content, and that's the way I'd be coming from, because as I've always said, if I was going to interview, for example, Gustavo Petro, and obviously Petro doesn't speak English anyway, but if we're doing an interview in Spanish, he'd run rings around me if it got into heavy debating or whatever, because my Spanish is at a level, but it's not going to be at that level where you can really get into the nitty gritty of one's past and where he's going for the future, etc. So English language content here is always it's the fancy decorations on the tree or whatever, but in times when they have to cut back or whatever, it's like, we don't need that. Or if they get an idiot like me who's happy to do it for free anyway, and they're going to go, he'll do this anyway, it's fine. So it ran its course for now anyway.
You didn't even get a beer out of it?
You get a free coffee from the coffee machine. Good times rolling in, eh?
You had Christopher Hitchens on your Corrigan cast.
Oh, Peter. Sorry. It would have been an effort to have Christopher on from Beyond the Grave.
I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. I was
If I did have Christopher, I wouldn't be sitting here. No. I was going to say we'd be up at the pearly gates, but surely Christopher's not at the pearly gates.
He's not there. No, he's not there. Sorry, I got that mixed up again. No, you write on that. You say you syndicate. You put the blog up on El Tiempo, and it's a good read. You put things up there that are, I would say, insightful, and sometimes you bite right down to the bone. You say things, as they say in Colombia, no tiene pelos en la lengua. You don't literally have any hairs on your tongue. Is the way, sort of like, there's no filter really. You can write more or less what you want. And I mean, you've written about everything from, I guess, I don't know. Well, let's just go from the most recent is that you've been just sort of ambling about bits of Colombia. You've been down, and this is what I like the most. Is I look at Brendan's posts and something. There he is in a panaderia or a tienda del barrio in San Jose del Guaviare, and he's writing that it's the best departmental capital in which to live. And your actual sort of description is that you delight in the drab. Perhaps you should go into that. I know San Jose. I like it. Not somewhere I would think of living, but if my interest was that of sitting in the panaderia and chatting to people, it would be a great place to do so.
Yeah, I guess you have to put a title on these blog stories, Richard, as you know. So, but why I said that? It's not that I was making it up and didn't believe it. Is that, like, number one, come back to costs again, and there'll be a common thread through this, but like you could get, and again, departmental capital. So I'm not saying like there'll be other towns far better of an equivalent size, but of the 32 department capitals, it's probably one of the cheaper ones for rent. And I can say this now because I went back in December, because I was there from September, for all of September and most of October and the end of August, for various reasons, which we might come to, because I had to go to La Chorrera, Amazonas, and nice. That was the reason I had the flight from San Jose. But in the first 2 months, I was just in a residencia without access to a kitchen or anything. But when I went back in December, I found another place, and I actually had a kitchen. So when I go to these places, I do like to know like how much a daily living expenses, the cost of living for an average person living there. So I was able to cook and so do shopping, grocery shopping, etc. And like it's comparable to like the barrios in Bogota, because people tend to think, oh, well, Bogota is expensive on everything, but it's kind of not. Like there are certain things Bogota is a little bit more expensive, but on day-to-day groceries, Bogota is comparable to most places, and indeed some pueblos are more expensive. And obviously it would make sense. San Jose del Guaviare is rather isolated. Now the road there is decent enough now, and actually it's made easier with the toll strikes. All the tolls are all the tolls are pretty much closed. They've taken them over. There's no more tolls. So they've it's madness. And you drive, I don't. Like sometimes I wonder like why anyone would bother having a car, because between the cost of fuel and then paying all these toll fees, it seems ridiculous. But yeah, so anyway, my point about San Jose, it's not that isolated, but at the same time, it's a good 8 to 9 hours from Bogota, and like there's not, you go further south and you're going right into the Amazon. So to get things there, certain things like shock horror, beer is more expensive there compared to my barrio Bogota.
But I mean, you mentioned in your blog there's no VAT on sort of products, and there's no VAT on beer, but it's more expensive than in Bogota.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about the beer. Did I say that? Like, there are certain products that are that are VAT exempt, like motorbikes. So things like that. And pretty much everyone seems to have a motorbike in San Jose. Walking is almost frowned upon, and of course I do like to walk. Obviously it's pretty hot there. You're talking at least early or the low 30s, I should say, to the mid 30 degrees Celsius, so it's pretty sticky and hot. But yeah, so things like that, electrodomesticos, so motos, your motorbikes. I'm not 100% sure if beer is exempt. I was told certain daily products, so maybe rice, but the balance, as was mentioned in my blog story on that, is that most, if not all, businesses and homeowners have to pay a vacuna, which is translated as a vaccine, but we would know it in English, I guess, is protection money to the guerrillas that control that area. Now, guerrillas, leftist, look, it's basically narcos. because I've been told there's a line somewhere along the road between San Martin Meta and Granada Meta, and San Martin is north of Granada.
Mm-hmm.
So once you go south of this line, after San Martin entering Granada, from that line, Granada and all south is more guerrilla, and north of that line, San Martin is more Paraco, the right-wing paramilitaries in control. So I've been told, but again, it's all, I'm guessing, just pretty much narco territory, and they divide themselves up in whichever way they want.
It's banditry, isn't it? It's banditry.
Yeah, exactly. Bandit country. But you see, there is a kind of a quid quo pro about that. Like, now, again, I can't just say it's because of the protection money and the guerrillas or the Paracos in control, because obviously you can go to small towns in Boyacá where there isn't any of that, as far as I know, or maybe I'm being a bit naive, and they're safe. But people kind of think, oh, San Jose del Guaviare. Like, it even kind of amuses me in my Estrato dos barrio that I love here in Bogota, Santandercito, where there's plenty of delinquency, and they kind of go, oh, be careful going down there to San Jose, it's dangerous, it's tierra caliente. But in terms of everyday concerns that people like me and you would have in terms of where's my cell phone, keep an eye on my computer and my belongings, you could leave your cell phone, your mobile phone on a table in a panaderia and go for a walk and come back 20 minutes later and it'll be still there, or somebody would have kept an eye on it, but nobody will steal it. Like, there is no delinquency of note in San Jose nor in Granada, from what I can see. So, like, for somebody like me, like that's great, because as you know, in other parts, if you're in Medellin, you're in Bogota or whatever, and you've got the gringo foreign look about you, there's always a risk that this guy's got something we want, and if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there, that doesn't seem to exist. It's like the criminality is just at another level. It's above all that petty crime. Of course, it's not petty crime to the person who has to suffer it if you get your mobile phone stolen or whatever. But yeah, that kind of narco criminality is just operates at another level. And I mean, I find it intriguing, Richard, because like there is a police presence in San Jose del Guaviare, but it's like they kind of do their thing, I figure, because I've asked a few people this and I haven't got any definitive answer of how exactly it all works. And the narcos do their thing, and never the twain shall meet in a sense, I guess. They just it's in a kind of perfect harmony. Well, perfect. It's in a harmony. It's
a parallel existence, isn't it? Because it happens, but it's not directly affecting you, but you are benefiting, let's say, from that security, as you say as well. It's not totally down to the security, of course, but there is some. It's that weird, I guess, dichotomy of living in these towns. Yeah,
and like, look, I'll give you another little story. Ignorance being bliss. So I went down to San Jose in August, as I alluded to, because I was going to La Chorrera, Amazonas, because that was kind of in my hit list to visit La Chorrera, because it's got a connection to Roger Casement.
That's right. We've talked about that in the past, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people can probably check all that out anyway. I won't go into all the details there. But that historical link to an Irishman, and it was always on my imaginary list of places to visit. So I went down to San Jose and went to La Chorrera. That's where I had the flight, and then came back. And then while I was based in San Jose, I visited El Retorno and Calamar, which are further south. El Retorno is like 30 kilometers from San Jose, and Calamar then a little bit further south again. And Calamar is the end, that you can't go any further by road. Then it's boats to Miraflores is one town, etc. But I had wonderful experience there. For example, in El Retorno, got there on a Saturday. There was a big kind of festival that weekend, unbeknownst to me when I got there, but it was a lively town. There was a cabalgata, so like a horse parade, a female-only horse parade on the Sunday. The mayor was giving out free booze, because at first I was there like, I just see people are just going over there grabbing a beer, and I kind of ambled over there having a look, and they're like, oh yeah, just drink away. Nice. So yeah, it was like lively, everyone having great fun. And then that evening, met a guy and get talking, and on the Monday morning, he invites me out to his finca, and we're riding horses, rounding up cattle for a couple of hours. And, there's just a great experience.
Yeah.
Now, again, they did tell me that, after 6 p.m., it's advised not to be on the road between San Jose and El Retorno. Best to be inside or in the town or whatever. But then, so all this happened, and I, as I said, met some wonderfully interesting people, good experience. And then it was only last month, you mentioned iQuiz. I had a special iQuiz trivia night for the Irish Embassy for their Christmas do for the Irish community.
Yeah.
And the ambassador was telling me that, like, the Irish, I guess I can say this, that the Irish government are kind of involved in peace discussions there between dissidents around El Retorno and Calamar. Yeah. So she was like, did nobody say anything? Like, not a bit suspicious, this Irish man traveling around there on his own? And like nothing. Nobody ever mentioned anything to me anyway. So her advice, now again, diplomats will be diplomats.
Yeah.
She was there like, I'd be very careful going back. So it's one thing wandering down there on a one-off, but going back, it might raise a few more eyebrows. Now, I did go back to San Jose del Guaviare. I didn't get down to El Retorno and Calamar. And like this is the other thing. I mean, El Retorno and Calamar, they're nice towns and stuff, but it's kind of like after a couple of days there, you kind of go, okay, what do I do? There's not an awful lot to do.
I have a question for you about San Jose, quickly. When you walk sort of away from the center towards, I guess, the barrio, I guess would be like the red light district along the river, is there still that bar that looks like a boat?
Yes. Yeah, it's still there. When were you there? When were you there?
I've been a couple of times, but I haven't been in a few years. I was down there not so long after the peace accords were done to go and visit the one of the reintegration places.
Okay.
Agua Bonita or something like that. So further out.
Oh, but there's actually two Agua Bonitas.
Yeah.
Neither of them have Agua Bonita.
No, there was nothing. There was no Bonita.
There's nothing. Well, there was water, but it wasn't Bonita. It wasn't pretty. Quite ugly. But yeah, that river.
Sorry, go on about the bar.
No, well, I was just going to say that if that was like 2016, 2017, you were there. I first visited San Jose and did all the kind of tourist things in 2018. Yeah. And in that 6 years, I'd love to check the DANE, the Office of National Statistics, to check what is the population boom in San Jose. But I would say it could have doubled in that time. It felt very much more like a built-up town. Whereas I remember in 2018, it just seemed more like a more country town, like a very rural town.
I went first, I think it must have been 2008 or 2009, and it was tiny.
Oh, wow.
And I was doing a piece on the Nukak in the displacement camps, the indigenous Nukak people.
Yeah.
But that was something else. Right? So tell me about your trip down to La Chorrera and Roger Casement, because you definitely feel some sort of kinship there. The two Irishmen, I guess, yourself and he. I do.
That's as far as it goes, Richard, I think.
I do ridiculous investigations into Brits who might have done things back here because I find it fascinating. But tell us about La Chorrera and how you were you able to connect with anyone with any sort of, let's say, knowledge of the history?
Well, yes. First of all, just in terms of my getting there, the original plan was to go. I had hoped. I'd looked into getting there by boat.
Oh, God.
So there is a route from Puerto Asís in Putumayo. It takes about 12 to 15 days, obviously depending on the flow of the river, etc. And of course, because 2024 and 2025 is starting in a similar vein, but 2024 was one of those years, Richard, where I kind of said, it's probably my last full year in Colombia. So I had a few things I wanted to do. And one of them was to get to La Chorrera. And if I could go by the most adventurous route possible, I would do it. So I went down to Puerto Asís, and I did visit the ports there to check out, could I get on? And I got a few contacts. In the end, it didn't work out. It wasn't the best season because the river was low. Somebody said they could bring me to El Estrecho, but that was only a third of the way. And so it would kind of leave me nowhere, really, on the border with Peru, but still not at my destination. And then, as it so happened, because I recall checking flights about this time last year from Bogota to La Chorrera, and they were like 2 million pesos. And I thought, that's ridiculous. So that's why I looked into the river route. Yeah. But then from San Jose del Guaviare, it was only 500,000 pesos, ida y vuelta, return. So it was far cheaper to get to San Jose by bus and take the flight directly from San Jose to La Chorrera. Now, one thing also, nobody told me this. I didn't ask, but apparently you're meant to announce your arrival there beforehand to the president of. It's an indigenous reserve, so there are no police. Yeah. There's no police presence, Colombian police presence. There is a military base near the landing strip. I was going to call it an airport, but that would be pushing it a little bit to call it an airport. Near the landing strip, there is a military base. So when I got off the plane, the military came around and they were like, "Have you got any cigarettes for us?" I don't, actually. I didn't know this was part of the deal. But anyway. But I did, I guess, benefit from an Irish bounce. Not of Roger Casement, but of recent vintage, because a good few Irish, I say a good few, half a dozen Irish or whatever, have been through La Chorrera of late. There's actually another Brendan. They're going to think every Irishman is called Brendan. There's another, he's an academic, a doctor, and he's been working in that area for a while. And it was actually, I hadn't known of the Roger Casement link. Shame on me at all, until I met this Brendan in Bogota in like 2015 or 16, and he was and still is going down there. So he's working on a book, and also now apparently they're doing some documentary. There's been an Irish film crew down there of late, and our ambassador visited last August. So I did get talking to one of the hoteliers, the main hotelier, and he also organizes the flights, the Satena flights. He's got his tour operator or whatever. So he brought me back to the village, and when I was out, my name is Brendan, and they go, "Oh, well, the other Brendan," and so that kind of helped, I guess, to those connections. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. Now, again, so this guy, his name escapes me now, but the hotelier there, obviously he knew the story because of what the other Brendan has been doing. Brendan Tobin, I should give him his proper name. So people are aware of it, and then the school headmaster as well. I met him because that's where Casa Arana, that's the big the Peruvian company, and Arana was the guy kind of seen as the head of all of this terrible, effectively genocide against the indigenous. So that's where they have the school now. There's the main secondary school. All levels school, and some borders there, because obviously you get people coming from nearby villages. You know, we say nearby 4 or 5 hours upriver or downriver to get there. There's nothing nearby around there. You're pretty isolated. So he knew the stories of Roger Casement and was able to tell me certain issues. And there's a mural at the school as well, which documents. There was one tragic event of many, but one particular that stands out, where the Maloca for like over 1,000 of them were hemmed into the Maloca, and it was burnt to the ground. Indigenous. So shocking what happened during that time. So there's a lot of history there, obviously, but not everybody. I kind of thought in my mind before I got there, I'd arrive and the whole town would be like, "Oh, like another Irishman in the mold." But no, a lot of the younger indigenous, younger locals, shall I call them, like don't really know too much about it. And as I wrote in my blog story about La Chorrera as well, like it's. You're kind of I'm used to anyway, going to these smaller towns and you meet so many friendly people and they're so welcoming and curious. Whereas like there was the kind of white man, what's he doing here thing in La Chorrera amongst the younger folk. guys my age and younger, so from late 30s down to the early 20s, who I don't know. Do I want to say exactly? Like, obviously, we're from drinking cultures. I guess they didn't come from drinking cultures. So, beer is available there. They drink a couple of beers and they become quite intense. That was kind of my experience of some of them. Not all of them, I would say, of course, but just some of them. Just kind of like, hey, you're the white man here now. You have to buy us beer. You're in our territory, kind of thing. And again, I'm sure any anthropologist or whatever will pull me up on this, but I found the two main tribes that dominate there. There's about 4 of them in the area, but the two main ones, the Uitoto, and the Bora. The Uitoto have a squarer face, and the Bora a rounder face. And I found the Uitoto were the ones that when they have like even just a can of beer, just after a can of beer, and they kind of turn quite intense and like kind of, you've got loads of money. And so it was a little bit uncomfortable in that regard. And then some of the indigenous, the Guardia Indigenous, or the indigenous guards, like they were kind of telling me things that added to the uncomfortableness that I had, like kind of going, there's more marijuana now in the village, and at night be careful, don't be wandering around, because I just thought, I'm in the middle of the Amazon, it seems fairly safe. Okay, there's no police, but I never felt so. Again, like obviously they're telling me that on one side, but my experience was rather different. I never felt, aside from the few escapades or incidents in drinking with a couple of them where they got a little bit intense and felt uncomfortable, but wandering around the village, I never felt unsafe. Apparently there had been a few crime incidents of
It might be worth just quickly explaining to my listeners a little bit of background about Roger Casement. You are the expert.
Oh, well, oh God, you certainly don't label me as an expert on Roger Casement, but what I know anyway. Well, basically, Roger Casement was an Irish diplomat born into the British Empire, as Ireland was still fully part of the United Kingdom and the Empire. He first came to fame for he's kind of almost seen in some ways as a father of human rights, because he was posted to the Congo in Africa, and he witnessed all these terrible abuses by the Belgian government. Belgium obviously in control of the Congo at the time. Basically genocide there as well, treating the indigenous like in terrible ways. So he documented this, and he returned to London, and all this was revealed. And obviously Britain at the time, it was kind of Edwardian Britain, but Britain's empire was a cause for good. So they were they were only happy to call out the abuses of other evil empires, whereas the British Empire, after the height of the Victorian era, it was a wonderful empire. Of course, didn't do any evil. So London was quick to condemn the Belgians, etc., and put a lot of heat on them to change their ways. Whether it made any difference or not, exactly, I don't know. As I say, I'm not 100% expert in this. But later, then he was posted to Brazil as a consul, and that's when he began hearing stories of this was in the rubber era, when they were extracting rubber from the rubber trees and the rubber plantations, and obviously it was very profitable in the early 1900s. And so he began to hear stories, and he traveled around Putumayo and the Amazonas, and it was largely Peruvian companies, even though it was officially Colombian territory. It was Peruvian companies that controlled the rubber plantations. And this Casa Rana was a Peruvian, but a lot of them had headquarters and were named on the London Stock Exchange, so there were links to London too. So he managed to smuggle out information about this, because he traveled around, but he was under the watchful eye of the rubber barons, because obviously his reputation preceded him as well from what he had done in the Congo. But yeah, again, all this information came out. So like his endeavors are kind of seen as, and not just Roger Casement, but Roger Casement is the one, I guess, well known from an Irish perspective. Sure. He was kind of seen as the father of human rights. And then, well, I won't say that he had a Damascene conversion, but he returned to Ireland after a stint in South America and joined the Irish rebel movement for independence against the Brits. And he was arrested importing arms in 1916 from Germany. So people know their history. Of course, that's in the middle of World War I, and Britain was at war with Germany. So he was sentenced to death. But because he had been knighted by the king pardoned him for his great humanitarian work in the Congo and in South America and in the Amazon. But later, diaries were published in British publications of his diary, revealing that he was homosexual, and that was worse than being a traitor. So he was hanged to death in 1916.
It sounds like
there is a book about him.
There.
Well, yes. Well, it was funny. Funny, not ha-ha, but like how the king could pardon him for being a traitor, but the homosexual, no. There you go. That was the world 120 years ago or whatever. But yeah, there is a book if people are interested. There's an English version of it, the Dream of the Celt, or El Sueño del Celta, by a Peruvian.
Yeah.
So that kind of documents
that's
Roger Casement's
Mario Vargas Llosa.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's it. Thanks, Richard. I knew you'd come good for me on that.
I've not read it, but how did it feel then to kind of tread in his footsteps a bit? I mean, it must be quite. There has to be some sort of ambience of it for you, teaching the history. I was thinking that if you could have done that 15-day trip from Puerto Asís, Putumayo, and then sort of followed it, you'd have a book there.
Yeah, well, and to be honest, I haven't even written that off of doing that boat trip because I actually have stronger contacts now. The owner of the biggest store in La Chorrera has a cargo boat, and he does that route. Now, in kind of in somewhat typical Colombian fashion, he told me he was going in January earlier this month, and I was writing to him I was in San Jose del Guaviare at the time, and he said, "Yeah, I'm going to be leaving X day," and then I was kind of sending him a few, and then it was radio silence, nothing back from him at all. So we'll see, but I might go. I might try that again if, as I said, the next few months, I'm kind of, there's a few boxes I want to tick. And now that I know it can be done, because he does it. Whereas when I was in Puerto Asís, I was less sure. But this guy, well, he told me at least anyway, taking him at his word that he does it. And he was doing it. So whatever happened in the last few weeks or whatever, well, he didn't get back to me. But yeah, that would be wonderful. As you say, maybe a book in it. But in La Chorrera itself, yeah, number one, I have to say, I kind of thought when I'd be going in there, I was going into kind of dense Amazon jungle, but it's not quite that. It's fairly open. There's not you'd have to get a good few hours outside La Chorrera to get more into kind of the wilds of the Amazon. But yeah, visiting the school, because that's the last of. That's kind of the monument in a sense of where all this happened. I like him to think that Roger Casement, and there were a few other Irish, British, obviously in the party too, around there, in the delegation that were traveling around, of what it would have been like back then. Because I flew in, which is quite different. You just in there from San Jose in about an hour. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you expected me to say. I was kind of very emotional or whatever, but I wasn't. I guess that's just more a reflection of my own personality. But it was certainly interesting to be there. I guess I looking at it also from a modern day perspective, kind of some of the contradictions. And look, I'm not saying obviously to live in such an isolated area, cut off as they are. On my second night there, we went to a traditional dance. I had to get the permission of the president of the reserve, but it was fine. It was fine because I had to pay as well a good bit for anyway, but that's fine outside of that. But it was to the next village being 5 hours upriver. And at that village, they had been they had a festival for the last few days. We got there on the last night, so it was ending on a Friday night with a traditional dance. But they had a football tournament, and a team from Caquetá were playing in it, a male and a female team. And it took them 2 days to get there via river and walking. Now, that's dedication just to go and play a tournament in the middle of the Amazon.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, and cool. And the men's team, their men's team won it, so it wasn't a fruitless journey for them anyway. They went back home with, I don't think there was any trophy, but they went back home with pride anyway, great pride. Yeah, so like I guess what I was I was mentioning that some of the kind of contradictions, so they kind of go on about, and as I said, some of the younger ones, unfortunately, the abuelos, as they say, the grandparents, but elders, they seem more balanced in their view on many things. Like while I was there, the current Colombian government, they're building over 100 relatively state-of-the-art houses, wooden houses, but certainly they look far better than anything else that's there. And they're giving them away to it's like almost like a lottery system to the locals there. So they talk about because they'll even call blancos. It's not just me because I'm not from Colombia. They'll call, like, there's medics. I was talking to medics from Bogota who were based there for a year, and they're kind of also referred to as the blancos because they're just not. Yeah, they're not from there. So they kind of talk about the government not helping us and all our terrible history, but like at the same time, they're getting free houses. Elon Musk has Starlink there, so in the main square any evening, just go around and there's about 100 kids just with their heads stuck in cell phones. And they tend to have. I didn't see anyone that didn't have, outside of a few abuelos. Most of them had mobile phones, etc. So this kind of maybe idea that I thought I was going to some really cut off, isolated place. Like it was in some regards, obviously. Like I couldn't just say, okay, I've had enough, I'm leaving tomorrow. Like I had to wait for the next flight, which was one in on a Thursday and one out on a Friday. So I had 8 days there. Now there are some other, I think, charter flights that go, but with Setena, that was the route I had. So, and then like food comes in from outside, like, because they regularly have scarcity of meat, I was told. Like they don't always have chicken or beef or whatever. So a lot of that has to come in. So like this idea that maybe like, we've been maltreated over the years. Obviously, there's been a lot of bad stuff that's gone on down there, but at the same time too, they have received mod cons, etc. It's not like they're completely throwing off the shackles of modernity. They're embracing it in many ways too. But then, so it's kind of like, have your cake and eat it idea.
Sure.
I don't know. It's complicated.
It is a complicated one. Many years ago, I went to Araraquara, so down to that way, but in Caquetá, and we went down with the permission of the Huitoto there, but they made us bring down chicken from I think it was I can't remember, Frisbee, Pollo Frisbee. They had to like take 4 chickens that had been cooked down with us because they just didn't have.
Okay.
That was basically our free passage in the area, was bring down some roast chickens from a fast food joint in Bogota.
Well, yeah, because when you said chicken, I was thinking maybe, a gallino, but not from Frisbee, which is kind of like a McDonald's of Colombia,
I've got one last question as we wind this down, because it's such an interesting conversation. But, as you say, you sort of gravitate to people from your homeland. Well, you gravitated towards the history of Roger Casement, obviously a very important individual. But some months ago, very sadly, the most famous Irishman in Bogota, Chris Kavanagh, passed away. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet him?
I didn't. I knew of him, and then I saw your post. Yeah, exactly. So I don't. gentleman, Cormac Ross, who I kind of call him the daddy of the current wave of Irish here. He came here in 1990, perhaps, or whatever. Cormac, because back then there was a handful of, not even a dozen Irish, so they certainly all knew each other. Now the Irish, I guess, are a bit scattered. So I'd heard of him and I'd heard stories of him, but I never met him. A character by all accounts.
So I met him on a couple of occasions, and when I had to go and sit down with him in like a tienda del barrio, before I'd even sat down, he'd ordered like 4 rounds of beers. I mean, the guy was, prolific, but I would spot him if I was driving through the area. I'd spot him in like Western Chapinero in shorts, carrying an umbrella with that white afro, man. He had the white afro. He was a character.
Yeah, but so alas, I never got to meet him, or certainly it might have been just fleetingly. But no, I mean, I'm pretty sure if I'd met him, I would have recalled the day of meeting him. So
I think so too. Anyway, we'll wind this down, Brendan. I'm so very grateful for your time and the stories. The stories are great out of San Jose de Guaviare, La Chorrera, Granada, Meta. These are places that are, there's a limited visiting numbers to these places, and you go down there and just sort of, I don't know, try and blend in, I think, and that's pretty. That's pretty. We have to celebrate this.
Well, look, I will say, Richard, I feel like we've only scratched the surface because I went rambling, maybe perhaps off on tangents and certain things. But like in San Jose, like I do rate like that I have a number of friends there now. Like I've numbers of guys, and they're saying, "Hey, you got to come here for mid-February. It's their Festival de Verano, their summer festival."
That's on the river, right? They have a party on the river.
There's like a little sand cove, like a sand bank in the middle because the river splits. So, but I was just told in general the atmosphere, like just being around there in the town, is pretty lively. So, like I have a few contacts there, as I say, and obviously because I was there for almost 3 months in 2 blocks. So, I did, and I, it's kind of as is my want. I do like to make myself part of the furniture. So I'm not just staying in my hotel room or whatever. I like to get out and have a chat. And it was this wonderful little, it wasn't quite a panaderia, actually. I gravitated more to this Tinto place. What do they call it? Tinta Diero or something like that, El Campesino. But it was a great place to watch football games. He was a mad Nacional supporter, the owner, but he'd have all the Premier League. So I just go in there and drink away. And so it's an old man's place normally. A couple of women might enter, but they're nearly frowned upon. But it was kind of interesting. So like I recommend. Look, it wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea, but like if people are concerned to go back to security or whatever, like I'd be going. Look, I'm not going to say it's completely safe because that would be remiss of me. Obviously, there are risks in these places, but the chances of something happening, like I would say, one would have to be terribly unlucky to get themselves into a tricky scenario there. And I will just say, Richard, 2025 looks like it's starting off in a similar vein to 2024. I've been invited by a US acquaintance to do some house sitting, which I did a couple of times last year. In Bogota, but this is in San Martin, near Granada, San Martin Meta, for February. So I might be in San Martin for the month of February. It's not 100% confirmed yet. And then if I am in San Martin, it would mean I'm closer to San Jose del Guaviare to go for the summer festival for a couple of days.
Well, there you go. That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
Well, I'm kind of just Roy Keane would not like me saying this because I remember him saying the only thing that goes with the flow are dead fish. But I'm kind of just going with the flow at the moment, and we'll see what happens in the next few weeks.
I just jump in there and say this is in 551 episodes. We've never had a mention of Roy Keane before.
Right, there you go.
For my unfootball initiated listeners, Roy Keane was a very famous, outspoken. Well, he was captain of Manchester United. I'm sure he captained the Republic of Ireland as well.
Yeah.
Until he fought with Mick McCarthy who was the coach. Well, that was, see, I remember. It was a good fight.
Yeah.
If you ever get to watch a game where Roy Keane is a pundit, you will know that he speaks his mind, I think is the best way of putting it. So,
yeah, well, he comes from the southernmost county of Ireland called County Cork, and people from Cork come with a reputation, Richard. That's all I'll
really?
say.
Okay.
Well, it's known as the Rebel County. So there you go.
There you go. So there you go. Well, thank you, Brendan, for your time. I'm going to point everyone, look up Wrong Way Corrigan. If you just put that into Google, everything that Brendan produces will come up on Google. And you'll see.
Well, if you do that, though, Richard, you'll get Douglas Corrigan first, the original Wrong Way. So you might have to put Brendan Corrigan or Wrong Way Corrigan blogger.
Okay, yeah. Brendan Corrigan, sorry for that. Brendan Corrigan, and you'll find out Brendan's observations of life in the drab, let's say. It's not drab in the slightest. It's not drab in the slightest. He likes his rough and ready places. He likes the different places, and he likes to blend in. And I think that's a great way to end this episode. Brendan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing these great anecdotes and stories. I was kind of hoping that you hadn't gone on Satena down to La Chorrera, but had caught one of the old DC-3s, left over from World War II, that are still the jungle taxis. So no, that would have made for a story too.
No, unfortunately, my options were limited, but I'm still working on this boat trip, Richard. I'm still working on it.
Well, we'll be here listening and waiting for the boat trip. It will happen. Maybe next time we'll hear from you from San Martin Meta or somewhere else. I've been Richard McColl on the Colombia Calling podcast. This has been episode 551, chatting to Brendan Corrigan. It has been a phenomenal conversation. Let's not leave it another 8 years.
Definitely not.
Right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me.
All right. We are off. That's awesome. I'm gonna focus it mainly on Casement, because I think it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's
sorry, just some box came up there, just getting rid of it.
Yeah, just leave it open.